I didn't realize how fast a normal life could tilt into something that felt contaminated. It started with a buzz on my boyfriend's phone while we were eating dinner on the couch, one of those quiet weeknights where the biggest problem should have been choosing a show. He glanced at the screen, and the color drained out of his face so quickly, I thought someone in his family had died. "Babe," he said, voice thin, "can you look at this with me?" He held the phone out like it was hot. An email. Subject line, "Your spiritual debt." I remember the way my stomach clenched, like my body already knew the punchline before my brain caught up. The sender name was Marcus. The same Marcus my boyfriend had been talking about nonstop for weeks. The spiritual mentor from his accounting graduate program. The one who resonated with his energy. The one who charged $60 a session for private guidance, and somehow had turned my boyfriend, smart, kind, usually level-headed, into someone who apologized to a stranger for asking basic questions. I read the email once, then again. It didn't sound like wisdom. It sounded like a threat wearing incense-scented words. Marcus claimed my boyfriend had created negative energy by canceling sessions, that he needed to balance the scales. And then, so casually, like it was a normal invoice, Marcus demanded $120 for 2 missed sessions, implying there would be consequences if my boyfriend didn't pay. I looked up. My boyfriend's hands were shaking in his lap. "I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered, like he was trying to convince himself. "I just told him I wasn't continuing." I wanted to grab my keys and drive straight to wherever this man was, walk into that wellness center, and ask him, very calmly, what gave him the right to talk to my partner like he owned him. But anger wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was how familiar this felt. Because 2 nights earlier, when I'd finally pushed back about the money, about the constant sessions, the paid meditation classes, the way Marcus always seemed to be everywhere. Marcus had smiled at me across a restaurant table and said, softly, like a diagnosis, "You're spiritually blocked." And my boyfriend, had flinched like maybe he believed it. That's when I knew this wasn't about meditation. This was about control. And Marcus wasn't. My life was simple before Marcus stepped into it. Not perfect, not glamorous, just steady. I'm 28, and I work full-time in a role that's stable enough to feel like a life I can build on. Good benefits, consistent hours, the kind of workplace where you can exhale because nobody is screaming, nobody is testing your loyalty, nobody is asking you to prove your worth every day. I'm not the loudest person in the room. I don't like attention. I like routines. I like knowing what to expect. And most of all, I like keeping my private life private. That's why when I met Phoebe, my boyfriend, 28M, I felt like the universe had finally handed me something soft instead of sharp. We'd been together almost 3 years, living together for most of that time. We met in the most boring way possible, a mutual friend's little housewarming get-together. I'd only gone because my friend begged me, "Please, just show your face for an hour." Phoebe was in the kitchen, washing dishes that weren't his, making the host laugh, asking people questions like he actually cared about the answers. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't trying to impress anyone, he was just warm. Later that night, I ended up on the balcony with him because we both needed a break from the noise. He offered me the last soda in the cooler without making it weird. We talked about nothing and everything, music, school, the way adulthood felt like a constant treadmill. When I laughed, he looked at me like he was relieved I existed. 2 months later, we were inseparable. Phoebe is the kind of man people trust instinctively. He remembers birthdays. He sends thank you texts. He can make a stranger feel safe within 5 minutes. He's also, if I'm being honest, beautiful in that effortless way. Curly brown hair he barely styles, bright green eyes that change with the light. He's the type of guy who can wear a wrinkled t-shirt and still look like he walked out of an ad. But the reason I fell for him wasn't his face. It was his heart. There's a softness to him that doesn't feel weak. It feels rare. He sees the best in people. He assumes good intentions. He believes kindness matters. And when I was going through my own rough patch early in our relationship, when I was stressed about money, overwhelmed by life, he didn't judge me. He steadied me. That's why living together worked. We weren't dramatic. We weren't the couple screaming in parking lots or posting passive-aggressive captions online. We had our little rituals. Sunday mornings were coffee and groceries. Weeknights were dinner and whatever show we were slowly working through. We fought sometimes, sure, but usually it was about stupid things, like whose turn it was to take the trash out, not about loyalty or trust. And there was something else I respected about our relationship, something that made me feel safe in a way I didn't even realize I needed. Phoebe and I had a financial balance that felt fair. He worked as a software engineer, made more than I did, and paid the mortgage because the house was in his name. I contributed what I could. We had a joint account for shared expenses, and we agreed on what made sense. No resentment, no scoreboard. But it wasn't always like that for him. When we first met, Phoebe was the one struggling. He'd just graduated and was doing this unpaid internship that barely covered gas. I was working full-time then, and I supported him through those months without throwing it back in his face because I loved him and I believed in him. So when the roles shifted, it didn't feel like he was carrying me. It felt like partnership. That's the version of us I thought was solid. Then Phoebe started his accounting graduate program. At first, it was exciting. He'd come home with new ideas, new goals, new plans. He talked about professors and group projects, and he'd sit at the table with his laptop open and his brows knit together, taking it seriously. I was proud of him. I still am. And then, about 2 months ago, he started saying one name more than any other. Marcus. At first, it was casual. Marcus said something interesting today. Then it became constant. Marcus has this perspective that's so different. Marcus really understands energy. Marcus thinks I have a gift. I remember the first time I felt that tiny prickle of discomfort. We were cooking dinner, and Phoebe was telling me about a group project. He said Marcus had guided the group through conflict, like some kind of enlightened leader. Phoebe's voice had that glow in it, the one people get when they're describing someone they admire too much. I tried to keep it light. So he's like your program's wise uncle? Phoebe laughed. Kind of. He's older. He's been through a lot. He's got this calming presence. I didn't want to be jealous. I didn't want to be the girlfriend who freaks out because her boyfriend made a new friend. But I also couldn't ignore how fast it escalated. Phoebe started coming home buzzing from class, eyes bright, hands moving as he talked, like he couldn't get the words out fast enough. And the more he talked, the more something in me tightened. Because Marcus wasn't just a classmate. Marcus was positioning himself as a mentor. A spiritual mentor. A man in his mid-40s, 46, Phoebe said, who taught meditation at a local wellness center and apparently had studied with monks and learned truths the universe can't put on paper. A man whose wisdom couldn't be verified, whose credentials, when I later looked, didn't exist. No website, no reviews, no certifications, no history. Just a man with a confident voice and a talent for sounding profound without saying anything concrete. And the problem wasn't that Phoebe admired someone. The problem was that Phoebe started reorganizing his life around Marcus. He'd rush home from campus, drop his bag, and immediately start telling me what Marcus said about sacrifice and alignment and awakening. I'd listen, nod, try to stay open-minded. But every time I felt like Marcus was taking up more space inside our home, inside my boyfriend's head, without ever paying rent. Then Phoebe told me Marcus had offered him private guidance sessions. Twice a week, $60 each. When he said it, he tried to make it sound reasonable, like it was normal, like it was an investment. And something in me went cold, because I knew what it really meant. It meant the money was coming out of the same pool we used to pay our bills, the same pool we used to buy groceries, to plan our future, to live. Indirectly, even if Phoebe didn't say it out loud. It meant I was helping fund a stranger's influence over my boyfriend. And the worst part? Phoebe didn't see it as influence. He saw it as healing. He saw it as growth. And when I pushed back, when I asked questions, when I Googled Marcus and found nothing, Phoebe looked at me like I was the closed-minded one. Like I didn't understand. Like I was standing between him and something bigger. That's when the hairline crack formed. Not because I didn't trust my boyfriend. I trusted him. I still do. But I didn't trust Marcus. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus didn't want to mentor Phoebe at all. He wanted to claim him. The shift wasn't sudden. It crept in quietly, the way mold grows behind a wall, out of sight until the damage is already spreading. At first, it was just time. Phoebe started staying later on campus, saying he and Marcus had long conversations after class. He'd come home glowing but exhausted, like someone who'd poured too much of himself into something and didn't know how to stop. He'd sit at the edge of the couch, eyes unfocused, replaying Marcus's words like they were scripture. Marcus says growth is uncomfortable, he told me one night, staring at his hands. Marcus says resistance means I'm close to a breakthrough. I nodded. I asked questions. I tried to be curious. But I also noticed the language changing. Phoebe stopped saying, I think, and started saying, Marcus believes. Stopped saying, I feel, and started saying, Marcus says this is normal. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it felt like watching my boyfriend slowly outsource his inner voice. Then there was the money. At first, he paid for the sessions himself, or at least he said he did, but the grocery bill crept up. The joint account dipped lower than usual. I'd log in to pay a utility and feel that small jolt of surprise when the balance wasn't where I expected it to be. I didn't accuse him, I asked gently. Hey, have we been spending more lately? Phoebe hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Yeah, I guess school stuff adds up, he said. Books, coffee, you know. I did know, but I also knew what $120 a week looked like. And then he mentioned something else. Marcus taught meditation classes at a wellness center. $15 a session, twice a week. Another $30. When Phoebe said it out loud, he tried to smile, like he expected me to be proud. It resonates more than the free yoga class at school, he explained. This is deeper. That was when my chest tightened. Because this wasn't just a side interest anymore. Marcus was now. And in guiding Phoebe emotionally, shaping his worldview, influencing his academic confidence, controlling his spiritual routine, and quietly absorbing our money. Every part of Phoebe's life had a Marcus-shaped fingerprint on it. I tried to bring it up carefully. Do you ever feel like he's everywhere? I asked one night while we brushed our teeth. Phoebe frowned at his reflection. What do you mean? I mean class, guidance sessions, meditation, advice. It's a lot for one person. He sighed. You're overthinking it. That word, overthinking. It landed wrong. Then there were the glances. Phoebe eventually insisted I meet Marcus, said it would help. Said if I just talked to him, I'd understand. So we met for dinner. And from the moment Marcus sat down, something in my body went on alert. He was charming in the way people learn how to be charming. Warm smile, relaxed posture, eyes that stayed just a second too long. He talked about his journey like a rehearsed monologue. Nepal, monks, awakening, cosmic truths. Every sentence floated, never anchored. When I asked specific questions, credentials, training, methodology, he smiled wider. True wisdom can't be certified, he said gently. Western systems limit spiritual growth. Phoebe shot me warning glances across the table. But I couldn't stop. Because while Marcus talked, I noticed how he watched Phoebe. Not like a teacher, not like a mentor, like someone measuring a reaction. He touched Phoebe's arm when he laughed, brushed his shoulder when making a point, leaned in close enough that it felt intimate, unnecessary. And the worst part? Phoebe didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and didn't see it as dangerous. On the drive home, he was furious. You embarrassed me, he said. You didn't even try. I apologized for my tone, for pushing too hard. But I didn't apologize for my instincts. Later that night, when I tried to explain what I'd seen, the looks, the touches, the way Marcus subtly positioned himself between us, Phoebe shut down. You're being paranoid, he said. He's like a father figure. That sentence made my stomach drop. Because a father figure doesn't need to touch you like that. A father figure doesn't isolate you. A father figure doesn't ask for your money twice a week. I stopped pushing, not because I believed Marcus was harmless, but because I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, I'd lose Phoebe before he saw the truth himself. So I watched. I listened. I paid attention. And I waited. Because something about Marcus felt rehearsed, strategic, hungry. And I knew, deep down, that men like that don't give up control quietly. They escalate. The breaking point didn't come with a scream. It came with a bill. Phoebe said it casually, like it wasn't going to detonate the room. We were on the balcony after dinner, the city lights below us, soft and distant. The kind of night that usually felt safe. He was leaning against the railing, scrolling on his phone, when he said, Marcus thinks I should increase my sessions for a while. I turned toward him slowly. Increase? How? Temporarily, he said quickly, just until I work through some blocks. My heart thudded once hard. You're already going twice a week. I know, but... He hesitated, then said it. He thinks consistency is key, and that resistance means I'm close to something important. I felt heat rise in my chest. How much would that be? Phoebe swallowed. Another 60 a week. That's when it finally snapped into clarity. This wasn't guidance. This was dependency. Phoebe, I said carefully, do you hear yourself? He stiffened. You said you'd try to be open-minded. I did. I am. But this is becoming a financial and emotional drain, and it's all going to one man. He looked hurt, defensive. You don't understand what I'm getting from this. Then help me understand, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. What exactly is Marcus giving you that you can't get from licensed professionals? From therapy? From actual mentors? From me? Silence. Phoebe's eyes dropped to the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. He reminds me of my uncle. The words hit me like cold water. My mom's brother, he continued, blinking fast. He basically raised me after my parents divorced. He died right before grad school started. I never really dealt with it. I felt my anger shift into something heavier. Marcus talks like him, Phoebe said softly. Moves like him. Makes me feel like someone steady is still there. That changed everything. Not the danger, but my understanding of why Phoebe couldn't see it. Still, I asked one more question, carefully, gently. Have you ever noticed who Marcus offers these sessions to? Phoebe frowned. What do you mean? Men? Older women? Anyone outside your age group? He went still. Then, slowly, his expression changed. I've never seen him mentor men, he admitted, or women over 30. I watched realization ripple through him. How he schedules sessions when the center is empty, I said quietly. How he compliments your appearance. How he suggested moving sessions to his apartment. Phoebe's breath caught. Oh my God. The mask cracked. And that's when the email arrived. Your spiritual debt. The moment I finished reading it, something hardened inside me. This man wasn't misguided. He was predatory. And Phoebe finally saw it too. That night, he canceled everything. The sessions, the classes, the access. But Marcus didn't accept no. He escalated. Texts, offers, guilt, spiritual threats, and then public confrontation. Emails dripping with manipulation. By the time Marcus accused me of blocking Phoebe's growth in front of his classmates, the line had been crossed. And the quiet life I'd been trying to protect, it was already gone. Shock doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like silence so heavy it presses into your chest and makes it hard to breathe. After Phoebe canceled the sessions and showed me Marcus's messages, we sat on opposite ends of the couch, not touching, not speaking, both of us staring at nothing. The apartment felt smaller than it ever had, like the walls were listening, like the air itself had been altered by someone who was no longer welcome, but still very much present. I feel stupid, Phoebe finally said. The word landed wrong. I turned to him immediately. No, don't do that. He rubbed his face with both hands. I let him into my head. I paid him. I defended him against you. My first instinct was to reassure him, to smooth it over, to make it hurt less. But I stopped myself. Because this wasn't about comfort yet. This was about clarity. You didn't do anything wrong by trusting someone, I said slowly. You did what you always do. You looked for meaning, for connection. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. He looked up at me, eyes wet. Then why does it feel like I betrayed you? That was the moment I felt it too. The ache, the quiet grief. Because even though Marcus was the villain, there had been a stretch of time where my voice had mattered less than his, where Phoebe had weighed Marcus's opinion more heavily than mine, where our partnership, something we'd built carefully, had been subtly downgraded. I felt pushed out, I admitted, not replaced, but crowded, like there was a third person in our relationship and I didn't consent to it. Phoebe nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't see it that way, but you're right. The next day, Marcus didn't wait long. He texted Phoebe again, concerned, gentle, falsely understanding. I respect your decision, but I worry about your spiritual regression. When Phoebe didn't respond, the tone shifted. Offers of discounts, invitations for coffee, no charge, just to talk. Phoebe showed me every message now. That alone told me how much things had changed. Together we drafted one final reply, clear, polite, firm. Please respect my decision. I don't want further contact outside class. 2 days later, Marcus confronted Phoebe after class. Not quietly, not respectfully. He accused Phoebe of abandoning his path, suggested loudly that I was controlling him, that sacrifice was necessary for growth, and sometimes partners hold us back. Phoebe came home shaking. And that night, when the email arrived, demanding money, invoking negative energy, implying consequences, I felt something shift permanently. This wasn't about boundaries anymore. This was harassment. Phoebe didn't hesitate. I'll talk to my advisor, he said. And for the first time since Marcus entered our lives, I felt relief. Not because it was over, but because we were finally facing it together. Still, the guilt crept in later. Quiet, poisonous thoughts, whispering questions I hated myself for asking. Should I have pushed sooner? Should I have trusted my instincts more aggressively? Should I have protected Phoebe better? But then I remembered something important. Marcus didn't succeed because Phoebe was weak. He succeeded because he was practiced. And the real test wasn't whether we'd been fooled. It was how we responded once the truth was impossible to ignore. Once authority entered the picture, Marcus changed tactics. Fast. Phoebe met with his academic advisor, Professor Jenkins, the following afternoon. I waited at home, pacing between the kitchen and the living room, replaying every detail in my head. When Phoebe finally walked through the door, his shoulders were slumped in a way I'd never seen before. Not defeated, just drained. "She already knew," he said quietly. That sentence made my stomach twist. Professor Jenkins hadn't looked surprised when Phoebe described Marcus's behavior. Concerned, yes. Angry, even. But not shocked. Apparently, another female student had raised concerns the previous semester. Nothing as documented as Phoebe's situation, but enough to make Marcus a familiar name in the wrong way. She asked Phoebe to forward everything. The texts, the emails, the invoice-like demand, the spiritual debt subject line, and she told him something that made my blood run cold. "You're not the first person he's done this to." From that moment on, everything accelerated. Marcus didn't stop contacting Phoebe after learning he'd spoken to faculty. If anything, he became more erratic, like a man losing his grip on a narrative he'd controlled for too long. One email came late at night. Rambling, emotional, self-pitying. He wrote about cosmic connections and past lives, claimed Phoebe and he were spiritually intertwined, that their meeting wasn't random, but destined. He suggested their bond went beyond mentorship, beyond time. I watched Phoebe read it, his face pale. "This isn't guidance," he whispered. "This is obsession." We forwarded the email immediately. The next morning, Professor Jenkins called Phoebe into her office again. This time, she didn't mince words. Marcus was being moved to a different section of the course, effective immediately. The department head and ethics committee were being notified. Phoebe was advised to avoid being alone with Marcus and to document any further contact. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like safety, but it didn't last. That evening, there was a knock at our door. I opened it to find a young woman standing there, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Are you Phoebe's girlfriend?" she asked. Her name was Alicia. She'd been a student at another university Marcus attended 2 years earlier. And her story matched ours, step by step. It started with advice during group work, then paid guidance, then emotional language, then claims of special connection, then anger when she pulled away. When Alicia rejected him, Marcus had accused her of spiritual ingratitude, claimed she owed him for his time, tried to intimidate her into paying. She'd filed a complaint back then. Nothing came of it. "He just disappeared," she said, "and now I know why." Alicia offered to submit a statement. Within 48 hours, the ethics committee had 6 reports. 6 women, all under 30, all targeted the same way. Marcus was removed from his classes and placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Phoebe didn't celebrate. He sat at the table that night, staring at his hands, processing the realization that his grief, his vulnerability, had been studied and exploited. "I thought I was healing," he said, but he was just harvesting. I reached across the table and took his hand. "You stopped it," I said. "That matters." Because escalation doesn't just reveal the villain. It reveals the truth. And the truth was clear now. Marcus hadn't been seeking enlightenment. He'd been perfecting a pattern. The silence after the storm was worse than the storm itself. Once Marcus was removed from his classes, there were no more emails, no texts, no confrontations. The constant tension that had lived in my chest for weeks simply vanished. And in its place, something heavier settled in. Grief. Not just Phoebe's grief for his uncle, but a shared grief for the version of our life that had felt uncomplicated. For the trust we thought was unshakable, for the weeks we'd spent walking on eggshells without even realizing how deeply it had affected us. Phoebe stopped talking much. He went through the motions. Classes, studying, dinner, sleep. But there was a distance in his eyes, like he was replaying everything on a loop. I could see the questions circling inside him. How did I miss it? How close did it come to going further? What if I hadn't listened? One night, I woke up to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark. "I feel dirty," he said quietly. The word broke me. I sat up and wrapped my arms around him. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I led him into my grief," Phoebe whispered. "I replaced my uncle with a stranger. What kind of person does that make me?" "A grieving one," I said firmly. "A human one." But reassurance only goes so far when shame has already sunk its teeth in. I had my own dark thoughts during that time, ones I didn't like admitting. I wondered what would have happened if Marcus hadn't been challenged. If Phoebe had gone to his apartment like Marcus suggested, if the line between emotional manipulation and physical betrayal had blurred. Those thoughts scared me, not because I didn't trust Phoebe, but because I trusted how predators operate. And there was something else. Anger I didn't know where to put. Not just at Marcus, but at the system that allowed him to move through universities and wellness centers unchecked. At the idea that if Phoebe hadn't been brave enough to speak up, Marcus would still be collecting money, still inserting himself into vulnerable lives. Some nights, the anger turned inward. I questioned my own patience, my hesitation, my fear of being seen as controlling. What if I'd spoken louder earlier? But then I'd look at Phoebe, curled inward on the couch, exhaustion etched into his face, and I knew. This wasn't a failure of love. This was the cost of being open in a world where some people exploit openness. The lowest point came unexpectedly. Phoebe received a short, automated email from the university confirming that Marcus had been officially expelled from the program. No details, no drama, just a sterile notification. He read it, nodded once, and then broke down. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears sliding down his face. I thought it would feel better, he said. That's when I realized something important. Closure doesn't arrive the moment justice does. Sometimes it lags behind, waiting for your nervous system to catch up. And before healing could begin, Phoebe needed to understand why this had happened. Not in a spiritual way, but in a human one. The email that changed everything didn't come from the university. It came from a stranger. Phoebe received it late one afternoon while I was at work. When I got home, he was sitting at the dining table with his laptop open, hands folded like he was bracing himself. "There's someone I think you should read," he said. The sender's name was Diane. She introduced herself as Marcus's ex-wife. At first, I assumed it was spam, some cruel extension of everything else, but as I read, my breath slowed. The email wasn't angry, it wasn't defensive, it was measured, almost weary. Diane explained that the university had contacted her during their investigation, looking for context. After hearing about Phoebe and Alicia and the others, she felt an obligation to reach out. What she described rewrote the entire story. Marcus, according to Diane, had always been drawn to spirituality, but about 12 years ago, he'd discovered something darker, that spiritual language could be used as leverage, that people seeking meaning were often willing to surrender boundaries if you framed it as growth. He didn't invent wisdom. He collected it. Bits and pieces from Buddhism, from self-help books, from therapy language, from yoga studios. He stitched them together into something that sounded profound but couldn't be challenged, because the moment you questioned him, he accused you of being blocked, fearful, unevolved. And the pattern? It was deliberate. Marcus observed first, identified vulnerability. Second, mirrored something familiar. Third, then slowly positioned himself as indispensable. For Phoebe, it had been grief. Diane wrote something that made Phoebe go completely still. Marcus would often study someone's emotional weak points, then subtly adopt traits of the person they were missing. Tone, phrases, gestures. He believed this created trust faster. Phoebe exhaled sharply. "That's why he reminded me of my uncle," he whispered. Not because of fate. Not because of energy, because Marcus made himself familiar on purpose. For Alicia, the vulnerability had been academic anxiety. For another woman, relationship insecurity. For others, loneliness. Every story followed the same arc. Reading Diane's words did something I hadn't expected. It didn't just expose Marcus. It freed Phoebe. The shame that had been eating at him, the belief that he'd been foolish or weak, started to loosen its grip. This wasn't a personal failure. It was a targeted manipulation by someone who'd refined his tactics over years. "I wasn't broken," Phoebe said slowly. "I was studied." And in that realization, something shifted. The narrative changed from "I let this happen" to "this was done to me." Not in a way that removed responsibility, but in a way that restored dignity. Around the same time, Professor Jenkins called again. She told Phoebe that because of the volume and consistency of reports, the university was implementing new policies, clearer boundaries around peer mentorship, additional training on recognizing manipulation, better reporting systems. Marcus had also been reported to the wellness center. They'd terminated his classes immediately. 2 days later, a classmate spotted Marcus at the airport. Social media confirmed it soon after. He'd left the state. The predator had moved on. And Phoebe? He didn't feel triumphant. He felt solid, grounded. "I don't want to just move past this," he said one night as we sat on the balcony again, the same place where it had started. "I want to actually understand it, so I don't carry it into the rest of my life." That's when he found a grief support group, a real one, facilitated by licensed CTM counselors, no mysticism, no power imbalance, no hidden fees. And for the first time since his uncle's death, Phoebe cried without shame and without someone trying to monetize his pain. That was the turning point. Not Marcus being expelled, not the emails, but Phoebe reclaiming his inner voice and choosing healing that didn't require surrendering himself to anyone else. The consequences didn't crash down all at once. They arrived in waves, quiet, undeniable, and irreversible. A week after Marcus was expelled, Phoebe received a formal email from the department head confirming the investigation's outcome. The language was careful, institutional, stripped of emotion, but the message was clear. Marcus had violated ethical boundaries, abused informal authority, and engaged in repeated patterns of manipulation. He was gone. Not transferred, not taking time off. Gone. The wellness center followed soon after. A generic post appeared on their website announcing they were restructuring programming and parting ways with an instructor. Marcus's name vanished like it had never existed there at all. Phoebe didn't celebrate. He read the updates quietly, closed his laptop, and went for a long walk alone. When he came back, his eyes were clearer, but older somehow. "I keep thinking about the women after me," he said. "The ones who didn't have someone to sit with them and ask the right questions." That's when I understood something important. This wasn't just fallout for Marcus. It was a reckoning for everyone who'd crossed his path. Alicia submitted her statement. So did 5 other women. Some of them reached out privately to Phoebe, thanking him for speaking up first, because it gave them the courage to name what they'd experienced without feeling crazy or dramatic. One message stuck with me. "I thought it was my fault for years. I thought I misunderstood him. Thank you for proving I wasn't imagining it." That's the kind of damage people like Marcus leave behind. Invisible, lingering, heavy. As for Marcus himself, he didn't disappear quietly. Phoebe heard through classmates that Marcus tried to frame his expulsion as persecution, that he claimed closed-minded institutions had punished him for being spiritually advanced, that he'd already begun talking about starting fresh somewhere else. But the difference now? People were watching. The university circulated internal warnings. The wellness community talked. The story followed him, quietly, efficiently, without Phoebe or me ever needing to raise our voices. That was the part that surprised me most. We didn't have to chase justice. It arrived on its own. At home, the changes were subtle but profound. Phoebe stopped quoting Marcus, stopped second-guessing himself, stopped apologizing for taking up space. We talked more, not in crisis mode, but in that honest, unguarded way that only comes after something survives a threat. One night, over takeout containers and half-warm noodles, Phoebe said something that made my chest ache. "I don't feel like I owe anyone access to my grief anymore." That was the real fallout. Marcus lost his influence. Phoebe reclaimed his autonomy. And our relationship, bruised, yes, but intact, grew something sturdier in the cracks. Not blind trust, earned trust. The kind that looks directly at discomfort and doesn't look away. Marcus tried to keep a narrative alive online for a while. Vague posts about betrayal, about being misunderstood, about people who fear growth. We didn't engage. We didn't correct him. We didn't need to, because when power is built on illusion, silence is often the loudest consequence of all. Life didn't snap back into place. It settled, slowly, quietly, honestly. In the months after Marcus disappeared, Phoebe finished his graduate program, with honors. The department head even mentioned his courage during the ceremony, thanking him publicly for speaking up and helping protect other students. I watched him walk across that stage, shoulders back, eyes steady, and felt something swell in my chest that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with relief. He was himself again. The grief support group became a steady part of his life, not as a crutch, but as a place where pain was allowed to exist without being repackaged into meaning or monetized. He learned how to miss his uncle without trying to replace him, how to sit with loss instead of outsourcing it to someone who claimed to have answers. And our relationship? It changed. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, in a quieter one. We talked more about boundaries, about how trust doesn't mean surrendering your instincts, about how love includes asking uncomfortable questions, not to control, but to protect. One night, months later, as we lay in bed talking about nothing, Phoebe said, "I'm glad you didn't give up on me." I turned toward him, heart steady. "I'm glad you listened." We got engaged 6 months after everything ended. No big announcement, no spectacle, just a weekend away, a simple ring, and a conversation that felt earned. When we started planning the wedding, we kept the guest list small, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. We wanted people who showed up when things were messy, not just when things were easy. Marcus became a story we tell less and less, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defines us. I don't have a universal lesson about spirituality or mentors or money. I only know this. Anyone who demands silence, payment, or obedience in exchange for growth is not guiding you. They're controlling you. And if someone ever tells you that your questions are a flaw, that your skepticism is a block, that your boundaries are fear, that's not enlightenment. That's a warning. We didn't win because Marcus was exposed. We won because we chose communication over ego, curiosity over accusation, and trust without blindness. And that, more than anything he ever sold, is what real growth looks like.